Okay, fellas, we will be starting a brand new unit today. Unit 3 is titled Cultural Patterns and Processes, and in your textbook, it's actually going to be the combination of chapters 4, 5, and 6. Chapter 7 is ethnicity, but we will cover that independently a little later. So let's go ahead and click on this first slideshow. Okay, so this is one of the few times that I am experimenting with a recorded lecture. So if there's some bumps in the road, I apologize in advance. But here we go. Let's get started. So chapter 4 in unit 3 is all about culture. Later on in the week, we'll transition to language, and then we'll transition into religion. So what is culture? When we think about Columbus culture, what comes to mind? What sort of things do you think about? Do you think of brotherhood? Do you think of the fact that we have a cross on the wall in every classroom? Or maybe a picture of Marcel and Champagne representing the Marist charisms and the Marist values of our school? Perhaps is the sports teams? Is it the architecture of our school? Is it the fact that we pray at the start of each class? Our uniforms? What is it that helps us understand our Columbus culture, right? So culture, in its bare bones definition, is the body of material traits, customary beliefs, and social forms that together form the distinct tradition of a group of people. So this would include visible elements. So how about that Columbus C, right? That's so iconic that we see on uniforms, jerseys, stickers, all over the place in our branded school. We see it everywhere, and we know what that C points to. It points to beliefs, it points to values. Well, as geographers, we can use cultural items, whether they're visible or invisible, to help us understand the world a little bit better. Habits. What is a habit? A habit is something that we repeat on a regular basis and that is unique to that individual. However, when we see that repetitive act branch out and then become something that a larger group of people do that is widely adopted, perhaps it's a collections of social customs. For instance, maybe it's prayer. Okay, maybe it's a a tailgate for a certain event or function, whatever the case may be, right? Whenever the community gathers together to practice this habit, then it becomes a custom. In a culture, we can understand a culture better by looking at its artifacts. So artifacts are physical, material aspects of a culture that are representative of that culture. They're made items. Take a look at the pictures below. And again, I implore you to think about some of these artifacts that might point to your Columbus's culture or maybe your personal family, right? What sort of artifacts exist within your own house that could point to the culture that exists in your home? So examples are chopsticks, blue jeans, the automobile, round hat, Santa Claus, and so on and so forth. When it comes to mentefacts, we're talking about invisible processes, okay? We're thinking of religion, we're thinking of language, traditions, and practices, or maybe even life choices. All right, so on one level, maybe we can't see these such as we do artifacts, but these are present, these are influencing, and again, these are adopted by a larger group of people. So when we think of Columbus, we might think of menefacts for Columbus as our Marist values, or maybe our brotherhood that we talk about so much in the school. Or in a greater sense, something that maybe the city of Miami, something culturally that is one of our values and beliefs. Sociofact. Okay, so again, think of the prefixes, right? So mentefact deals with mental processes. Socio is going to tell us society. This is the way in which culture organizes itself, and there's going to be a structure, okay, sort of like a hierarchy that dictates social behavior. So think of families, think of who's at the head of your family, and what role every family member plays. The same goes for tribes, states, and your governments. schools. We can think of how the fact there is a board at Columbus, and then there's President Kruchek, Mr. Pugh, the deans that trickle down to our department heads, then to us teachers, and then to you guys. The church group, we have, if you think of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, these are socio facts, okay? And again, we can look to the organization of certain groups of people to help us understand the culture of a place. So this is a little case study that we can take a look at. And I would like for you guys to do this on your own time, okay? The process here, or the experiment here, is to take a look at these shoes, right? Which could be considered artifacts. And at first glance, what do you get from these pictures, right? What do you think about these items? And if you don't know about these shoes, okay, the next couple of slides will shed some light on them. But the goal here is to understand that not only are these artifacts, but these artifacts can point to social facts and mentefacts. When taking a closer look, we realize that these shoes were actually used to pretty much beautify Chinese women in the long-standing history of China. Foot binding, a very painful process that was done when a girl reached the ages of 5 to about 7 or 8 years old, pretty much mutilated her feet so that they could make her feet smaller, more attractive to men. But on another level, if the mentefact is to make her feet more appealing and more attractive for men, then the social fact would help us understand that that would put women at the bottom of the labor totem pole, as women were no longer able to walk after this foot binding experience. Feel free to look this up on YouTube. I don't believe the link works anymore, so my apologies, okay? But this is a great documentary, or a great short video. I'll show you guys next time I see you, but feel free to watch this. So again, these sorts of things can point to culture. So we're gonna go ahead and you can do this little quiz on yourself and identify each picture and consider whether or not the picture is a artifact or holds evidence of sociofacts, or maybe mentefact, or maybe a combination of each. Okay, so let's start with our introduction, okay, to folk and popular culture. Folk culture is small, it's homogeneous groups, relative isolation, okay, so it's very, it's gonna be very uniform, okay. On the contrary, pop culture is very large, it's very diverse, it's heterogeneous, and it's very widespread. So in almost every single way, folk culture is very, very different than popular culture. However, they both contain the basics: food, clothing, shelter, leisure activities, such as sports, arts, recreation, things like that. So in both types of culture, you'll see the very same elements. Now, when we understand culture or language or religion, we are always going to try, or at least attempt to understand these three aspects. Its hearth, which means origin, how it diffuses or spreads, and how it's distributed, okay? So in folk culture, the origin or the hearth is sometimes undetectable. Sometimes it's very difficult to find out where some folk cultural practices actually come from. It's just some things that we do, right? I give the example, and I'm not too sure how many people can connect with this, but on New Year's Day, my family, for instance, may get our suitcases, and we'll take our suitcases and we'll walk around the neighborhood, and we'll go in a big loop and come back. And what that basically means is that we're hoping to travel in the next upcoming year. Or how about this one? And again, I don't know how many people actually do this, so this might sound a little off or strange, but we have done this in the past. How many of you guys have filled up a bucket of water on New Year's and have opened the front door after the New Year's ball drop and have tossed that water out into the front lawn? Well, guess what that means? That always meant that the past year's negative occurrences, we're washing away with the bad, and in comes the new. So if you're scratching your head and you're saying, "Sir, I've never done that in my life," where does that come from? I got to be honest with you, I don't know. It's just something that our family and culture has done over the years, and I'm willing to bet that every family has something like this. So folk culture, again, sometimes when it comes to the origin, it's hard to find where that cultural practice comes from. How does this diffuse? Very slowly. All right, it really does depend on the person carrying their cultural traits with them from one place to the next. We call that relocation diffusion. Distribution, spatially isolated, influenced by local factors. Okay. Now, pop culture in almost every single way is very different. Its origin, someone does a TikTok dance that goes very viral. You want to learn how to do the Dougie, or you want to do a different dance, or there's a song that's all of a sudden trendy, and you want to find the origin of this popular cultural item. You more than likely are going to be able to find it. You want to find out where, when, and where did they invent the iPhone that now everybody or most people are starting to get a hold of, or why everybody in this classroom has an iPad in front of them. Guess what? You can find the hearth. How does this stuff diffuse? Rapidly through hierarchical diffusion. Now again, hierarchical can definitely signify a node of authority, but in this case, if we're talking about cultural items, we can be talking about authority, but we can also just be talking about how things spread from urban places out into rural settings. And then the distribution of popular cultural items is wherever technology allows it to. Okay? So that's a big difference from how folk cultural items are distributed versus popular cultural items are distributed. In one, things are going to be distributed where they can be moved by the person, influenced by local factors. And in the other case, if the internet is available, pop culture can find its way there. Take a look at this slideshow and determine for yourself what is the cultural item that we're looking at and whether or not it is a folk cultural item or is it a popular item, and why. Does it check off either of the boxes? This is just a slide to show how the advent of the internet has carried popular culture into spaces where folk culture was once dominant. Okay, some folk cultures are threatened by popular culture. Yes, that is a reality. Folk cultures in general, fellas, are dying out, okay? Especially as technology modernizes. In many cases, there is a competition, a very natural competition by pop culture and folk culture. And folk culture tends to be consumed by popular mainstream things, whether they are McDonald's, whether it's fashion trends, whether it's just, technological processes. And in very rare cases, some folk cultural traits or processes can all of a sudden be mainstream. Okay, maybe someone on TikTok makes the wearing of a folk hat popular, and then all of a sudden in New York City, everybody's wearing that folk hat. That's how these two cultures can intertwine, but in some case can overtake the other. So a good question, for instance, on this relationship is how has the diffusion of pop culture affected the status of women? In some cases, pop culture, because it travels through the internet, can reveal the injustices of women in some other areas. Okay? So pop culture through TikTok or through social media or through the internet can reveal that maybe women have the access to some certain rights or privileges in one country or one space, and that might positively or negatively affect their status in another place where maybe that's not the case. We like to think of the Amish. The Amish are a good case study in terms of this relationship between pop culture and folk culture. The Amish are a folk people, all right, a very traditional group of people that do not believe in the use of technology, whether it may be cars and automobiles or cell phone devices or internet or anything like that. And the Amish, it's not that they limit themselves to in emergencies. In emergencies, they're allowed to. However, what has happened to the Amish over time is that they've had no choice but to diffuse and relocate themselves westwards and now south. And the reason being is because real estate in Pennsylvania has just become too expensive. And so the modernizing of their space historically has forced them to carry their folk lifestyle into places that are a little bit more rural and a little bit more inexpensive. So the popularizing of certain areas can sometimes push out folk settlements. Indian dowries is another good case study. It was the tradition in arranged marriages for the man in India to provide a gift, which is a dowry, to the woman and her family. In recent times, this role has shifted, where the woman was expected to provide this gift to the man. And that simple shift that became mainstream throughout India and popular throughout India actually had some dramatic social consequences, where in instances the woman didn't necessarily have the ability to provide a dowry. She was then outcasted and considered either undesirable or unmarriable. This caused tremendous social consequences for women to be seen as negative, causing some to commit suicide or just not to fit within the social caste system in India. So, as a result, the Indian government has outlawed dowries in general. Even though the government has outlawed these traditions still persist. Okay, so as you guys can see, there's been protests from the picture below. Your book does a great job of expanding on this. Sustainability challenges for popular culture. Many times popular culture creates a uniform landscape. You can see that as a positive. Maybe it's just more accessible, maybe it's just something that is easier to create. But in many cases, when things become uniform, you do lose that individualism, you do lose that unique identity that you may see in different parts of the world. My sister just got back from Portugal, and where they are doing a good job of advancing, and they are one of the more developed European countries, they still have a great deal of folk culture, beautiful architecture that dates back hundreds of years. And we see places make conscious decisions on how much to popularize their places. As where we live in the United States, we know that pop culture pretty much dominates. We might see demands of popular culture and how it can strain resources, okay, and how the demand for popular places and activities can sometimes destroy the natural environment. Think of the golf course. Okay, this is straight out of your book. The simple example of a golf course and how appealing a golf course actually is can lead us to appeal to a certain demographic of socioeconomic status to have an impact on the natural landscape. What once was maybe a park or just an open field for animals is now going to be transformed to a mainstream activity such as a golf course. Okay? And that pretty much puts a bow on our conversation on culture. Okay? Please understand the differences between folk and popular culture and do a good job of working through that review packet. I have sent you guys an email of our chapters, so if you had a hard time completing the review packet, please use that email that I sent you to complete it properly. Okay? I appreciate you guys for listening in, and I hope you guys have a great class. Take care.